today to the IC Reporting 4.0 webinar about modifying standard reports. Now, this webinar will be an hour and a half approximately in its delivery, and there will be time for questions, if not during the webinar, of course, at the end of it as well. So if you do have questions, you will see that there is a questions pod. Please post any questions that you have there, and we'll make sure that they get addressed during the webinar. This webinar is designed to give you sort of an overview about some of the additional reporting options that you would have once you wanted to go further with the reporting possibilities that IC offers. It also assumes that you have basic familiarity with what's already currently available with historical reports, interaction reporter reports, and reports that you can create your own using Report Assistant. If you're not as familiar with those, we do have a pre-recorded reporting webinar that you can look at as well, which covers a lot of the basics of reporting. And again, this is sort of more advanced topics. We will touch on things that you can do with flexible fields, modifying existing reporting templates, and even going into Crystal and taking it a little bit further if necessary. So we'll talk about those things, and hopefully it will shed a light on a lot of that for you. Just to kick it off, I want to give you a little bit of an introduction to myself as an instructor. My name is Ryan Huey. I'm a global technical instructor for interactive intelligence. I've been at the company about 7.5 years. I love what I do, which really is me traveling about 80% of the time and delivering a majority of the classes that we have to offer. So this is just a little bit of my background and what I've done. It's not so important, but that's me with the hat. All right, so this webinar, again, this is what we're going to get into, covering a little bit about flexible fields. Now, some of you may be familiar with this already, so it may be a little bit of an overview, but I will show you a couple other things that you can do with flexible fields that you may not have been aware of, especially if you want to modify an existing reporting template and keep 2 copies of the same report with modifications to your flexible fields. How do you go about doing that? I'll show you how to make a copy of the template and add it into Interaction Administrator and all those other good things. And then again, we'll take a look at what you need to put in place on a local workstation before you can begin thinking about doing some modifications of report within Crystal as well. So first of all, this is sort of an overview of what we're going to talk about during the webinar. We'll look at the idea of customizing reports, especially as it relates again to flexible fields, modifying an RPT file, and even removing, adding, or modifying formulas, fields, and values within an RPT file directly within Crystal. Now there are some prerequisites, FYI, if you want to go down the road of modifying or creating your own custom reporting templates. There are some things that need to be taken care of ahead of time. These things are also detailed in the Advanced Reporting Guide, but I will show you a little bit about that today. And when it comes to that point in time, if you would like to take screenshots of some of the screens that I'm going to show you, some slides that tell you what you need to do, I'll notify you of that at the time to give you the opportunity. One of the things that you will need to do is make sure that the appropriate DLL file is put within the location on the local workstation so that Crystal is able to integrate with IC RPT files and the data in the database and so on. We'll also look at how you need to extend the environmental variable path in Windows to allow to point to where the necessary files are located. You do need to also create an additional ODBC data source. Normally not necessary when we're looking at reporting because all those reports that we run through ICBM are actually directed back to the IC server, and the IC server has the necessary data sources already created. But again, doing it in Crystal requires you have direct connection to the database so that you can access the data. And then lastly, you would need to map a drive to wherever your RPT files are located, and we'll go over that too. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about flexible fields. Now some of you are probably very familiar with this, and some of you really probably have no idea what I'm even talking about, and that is that our canned reports, our historical reports, in some cases allow for these modifications to something called a flexible field. And if you were open Interaction Administrator and go to the historical reports container or reports container and opened up one of the reports from there, under the Tables and Parameters tab, you might see, for certain reports, that there are 1, 2, or even 3 flexible columns that are available. And what these allow you to do is to basically modify the data that's being displayed within the report. Now, this does not require access to Crystal or modifying a Crystal template. You can do this within Interaction Administrator very quickly and easily by getting to this configuration. So let's go ahead and open up Interaction Administrator, and then I'll show you exactly how to do that. Here's a little bit of a heads up about some instructions. And again, if you wanted to take just a quick screenshot of this, it might be recommended. But basically, it talks about this idea of going into Interaction Administrator, finding the reports container, locating the report that contains the flexible field that we want to modify, double-clicking on it, and then going to the Tables and the Parameters tab. From there, we find the flexible field, we modify the value, the numerical value for what it's going to display, and then I can save that change. The one thing that we do need to be mindful of is if we do modify something like a flexible field on a report, it will impact everybody who utilizes the report. Therefore, we might want to consider making a copy of the report. Then I could have 2 reports, one with the default values and then one with the modified values for the flexible field modifications that I've made. All right, so these are some of the reports that have flexible fields. In fact, these are all the reports that have flexible fields. So again, it's a decent slide for you to also take a screenshot if you want to. I'll leave it up on the screen for a minute. But I'm also going to, at this point, open up Interaction Administrator so that we can take a look at this sort of concept and see how to make use of it. All right, so I am connected to my dev environment here. And what I want to do is go into the container for historical reporting. In the historical reporting container, I'm going to see all of the report names as well as the display name. Now, generally, they're at least somewhat logical in their association, but the display name is what we're going to see in ICBM when we attempt to execute the report. It's also the way that the report will be listed if we want to grant someone access to run that report via the Security tab and access control. So we'll look at that container and configuration a little bit later as well when it comes to granting people access to newly created RPT files or modified RPT files as well. So let's take a look at this idea of modifying a flexible field. Now, one of the things that I might want to do is identify which report has the flexible field that I want to modify. So let's say that I'm interested in something related specifically to my agents so that I can look at things like, did they experience any flowouts, any local disconnects, things like that. So let's take a look at the Agent Performance Detail Report, going back into Interaction Administrator. So I should be able to sort either by the report name or the display name in order to get a better idea of what I'm looking for. So here we go. I want to look for one of these, Agent Availability Detail or Agent Performance Detail. I forget which one I said, Agent Performance Detail, so let's just pull that up real quick. All right, now when you open up and double-click on an existing report configuration within Interaction Administrator, you can see that it lists what type of report it is. It will always show as an IC report. And just as a heads up, if you are going to create and add a new RPT file, this is how you want to add it within Interaction Administrator. Yes, it is a Crystal report, but that is not the option that we normally use if we want to access and execute the reports through IC Business Manager. You also see the display name, the category, and you're able to create your own categories when adding new reports too, a description, and the location of the RPT file. Now, there are different RPT files for SQL environments versus Oracle environments, and I'll show you how those are accessible on the IC server too. All right, but the big tab that we want to look at is this Tables and Parameters tab. And what we're going to see here is the table that we're pulling the data from. So this is the iAgent QStats table. It is an interval-based table so that I can get a breakdown, usually in half-hour increments, of how my agents are performing within a work group and based on the interactions that they're being handed. So if I want, I can come in modify one of these existing reports by identifying 1, 2, or 3 of the available flexible columns. So if I come in here and I double click on this, or click on the edit button, it will open up a new and additional screen, the parameter data screen. Now on this screen, you're going to see that there's a field here for prompt. And what the prompt field is designed to do is to show you what options you have available for this flexible field. Because again, the idea is I could make it show me something that maybe it was intended to show by default, but we have options. So the default value is available here at the bottom, and that is currently set to 1. 1, as this report out of the box, is set up to show me local disconnect events. Something we certainly care a lot about for our agents is identifying if they have ever disconnected locally an interaction, while talking to a customer. All right, so let's say for some reason I no longer am interested about local disconnect, and I instead want to get some alternate data. I could arrow through or move through these options to see sort of what things I have that are available to me. And a big one might be something like a flowout. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a flowout is, it is when an interaction goes into a queue, but it does not reach a connected state. For instance, we alerted the agent to a call, but for whatever reason, they were unable to handle the call in time, and they went agent not answering. That is a classic flowout event. All right, so maybe I want to modify for that. Or maybe I want to see a total of how many interactions entered that agent queue, how many were transferred, and you can see there are other values as well. I have ring. There are even custom values that I can add. So if we're doing any sort of custom logging via handlers and writing additional data to the iAgent queue stats table, I could get the flexible field to show me that, again, quickly and easily without necessarily having to go and modify the Crystal template. I can see information about internal to internal calls, internal to internal ACD calls, supervisor requests. I mean, there's a ton of information in here that we can quickly and easily add into the report. So let's go ahead and say that I want to modify it and set the value to show me how many supervisor requests have been made from this particular person. I just set the default value to the modified numerical value that I've chosen and click OK, apply, verify, and that's basically it. Now, whenever anybody, not just me, but anybody attempts to run this specific report, that field in the report is now going to show them supervisor requests. So good. It may be something that you want. It may be something that you want to modify the report for everybody. But what happens in a situation where I do want a modified version of the report because I do want the flexible fields to show me something else? However, I don't want it to always be the same for everybody. So let's say I left it at its default value of 1. All right. From here, again, it's just showing me the local disconnect events, and that's the way I'm going to have it. But what I could do is very quickly and easily come down into this container, and from here I should be able to copy the report. Now notice when I came down in here, right-clicking on it does not give me that available list of options for copy or paste or anything like that, so you may think that it's not actually possible. However, if it's highlighted and you were to go to the menu and choose Edit, and then you would see that copy is here. You'll also notice the shortcut command is still available, so even if I don't come up to the menu, I should be able to do Control-C and then Control-V. Now then it's going to give me an option to name the report. I'm going to keep it very simple and literally just name it with a 2 on the end for now, and it basically creates a copy of that report. Now everything about this report that I've currently copied is identical. The report type, the name, the category, description, where the template, the RPT file is located, and even the configuration of all the tables, parameters, and flexible fields. But now that I have the report saved with an alternate name, then I can say, okay, I'm going to modify the report. I'm going to make it show me supervisor request, because that's what I want. I say okay, And then I can come back into the report and even give it a different name. All right, with supervisor request, now it's very easily identifiable as being a different version of the same report based on my flexible field modification. So I save it, and I'm okay with it. Now, the other thing we need to remember about reports is that we can grant people access to individual reports, or we can grant them access to all reports. Now, if an individual has access to all reports, they're immediately going to see any newly created and added reports that I put here in the historical reporting container. If, however, they're being granted reports on a one-by-one basis, I'm now going to need to go in and grant them access to this newly created report. And it looks like I have a question, so why don't I go ahead and take a quick peek at that. Okay, so the question you guys can see probably from Tamara Henson is asking whether or not it's a way to modify the agent performance for the total number of calls for a group. And I assume you mean work group. And here's the situation normally with reports is that we expect that the data we're displaying in the report is being pulled from the same table. Now, there is an association, obviously, between the work group and the agent tables, I work group QStats and I agent QStats, but they are different tables. Now, if there's data in the I agent QStats table related to the work group that we want to display, we can add that. Maybe not with a flexible field, but certainly by going into Crystal. There's also custom logging and things that we can do. So to answer your question and not to be too ambiguous about it, yes, if you want to customize the report, we virtually can pull anything that's in the database, anything at all. Tables that are part of the IC architecture, newly created tables that we've made, views, using custom logging information from handlers, anything like that could be possible. All right, and I will answer this in a textual format here a little bit later too. But excellent question, Tamara. All right, so now let's think about for a minute this idea of granting someone access to the report that I just made or modified. Okay, so what I'm going to do is come up into my user container, and I'm going to go ahead and just pick on Beth Farmer, open her up, go to the Security tab, and from here, what I want to do is go into Access Control. Now, we like to talk about how much we love the improved interface for 4.0 when it comes to security and access control, but it really is huge. Because now I have the ability to open up the container where I want to modify the settings and very quickly and easily searching for whatever it is I'm trying to display. So I can come in here and type report, and you can see that there is a section for historical reporting. Let me just make this bigger here so we can play around a little bit. Okay, so all the historical reports are here. Now, yes, again, I could grant Beth Farmer the ability to see all reports, but it might be overwhelming to her. We have so many canned reports. When they go in to open up IC Business Manager, sometimes they're confused and overwhelmed, and they don't know what report to choose. So instead, maybe I say, I want to pick the reports that I want Beth to be able to see. Okay, and now what I want to do is come down and find the report that I modified so that I'm able to make use of it. I think I sort of gave it exactly the same name, unfortunately. So let me go ahead and open that back up. Actually, let me backtrack a little bit to make this a little bit easier to follow for everybody else. Okay, so the report that I originally modified was the agent performance detail. So let's go back up here. Agent performance detail, there we go. Now notice it just says 2 on the end of the name that I created. So that was just actually when I created it. So that's what I'm looking for is Q period agent perf detail name 2. I could have chosen a better name, but alas, I did not. So let's go in and take a look at that again. Beth Farmer, access control. Okay. There we go. All right, so not a very clever name, but again, it is available. And now that I've created it, I can grant that person access to the report. And when they launched ICBM, they would see this new modified report or RPT file based on my flexible field modification. So Very useful considering how many options that you have within the flexible fields. And there are a lot of them, again, that are available. I'll show the slide here again if you want to look at it, or again, take a screenshot of it. You'll also notice that most of them are essentially Q period statistics reports or distribution Q performance reports. They're definitely interval-based reports, so we're breaking down again those statistics in a half-hour window and accumulating them and writing them to the work group or the agent table so that we can get feedback based upon that. So let's take a look at another one just for fun. I'm going to look at the QPS abandoned report. All right. Here we go. Q period statistics abandoned report. I can open it up, go to tables and parameters, and I'm going to see there's a whole bunch of parameter definitions and, of course, a flexible column. And different reports are going to have different flexible values that are displayed, so it's not all the same for all the reports. It's worth opening them up and taking a look at it, because I would hear this all the time when I worked in support, that people wanted only a very small modification to a report. They may have been happy with 90% of the data that was being displayed within the report, but they really wish that this one field showed them something different. And this is the way that we basically can accomplish that, right? I can check out all the options, flow out, local disconnect, abandon, or whatever, and when I want, I can modify it, and that basically is that, all right? So if you have any other questions about flexible fields, certainly do let me know, but we've got a few other things that we want to talk about as well. So our reports, in going back as long as I can remember, basically were built on the architecture of using crystal reports. So when you launch historical reports from either ICBM or in older versions of IC using just supervisor, that interface that you saw when you were entering parameters and definitions is all based on crystal. So in order for us to look at, modify, or create reports that IC can make use of, we need to make sure that we're using Crystal and that normally it is version 9. I can get later versions of Crystal, but I want to make sure that I'm saving the RPT file that I've created into a compatible format, which is Crystal Reports version 9.0. Okay, so anything you modify or save, do make sure that you've saved it in the appropriate version. All right, so now let's talk about some of these prerequisites, things that you would need to do if you did want to go and begin modifying or creating your own custom reports for IC. And one of them is this idea that there is a file called the U2L ININ support A DLL file, and this is a DLL file that is an IC DLL file. It automatically gets installed on any workstation where ICBM has been installed. What we want to do is basically search for and find this particular DLL file, and we want to copy it, put it into the Crystal Reports folder location based upon the version. And that's what this slide is attempting to detail for you. So again, this is useful. If you wanted to take a screenshot of this particular slide, you're welcome to do that. And again, I want to reiterate that everything that I'm telling you right now about getting ready to use Crystal and putting the DLL file, extending the path, and doing all these other things are available within the IC Advanced Reporting Guide. Now, the IC Advanced Reporting Guide, the Reporting Data Dictionary, and the Advanced IC Reporting Guides, anything like that, they're all available out on the support portal. And I'll show you that a little bit later, how you can get access to these documents, because they're very, very thorough. There's a lot of information, and if you're going to go down this road of making custom reports, you really need these documents so that you can wrap your head around the complexity of what you're getting involved in. All right? So this DLL file, what we want to do is go into Program Files, Crystal Decisions, and there will be a version folder there, XXX, representing the version of Crystal. Now, unfortunately, it's not so straightforward. So, for instance, Crystal Reports 9.0 is actually 2.0. All right. So I would find the appropriate version folder. There's a bin folder in that location, and I simply want to copy that DLL file into this location. And what this does is it makes Crystal able to read or access the information in the RPT file that IC is making use of. Okay, it looks like I have a couple more questions here. I'll take a look at it. Would you be able to please email us this PowerPoint? Robert, unfortunately, I cannot do that. That is not something I'm able to do. This is why I'm encouraging you, if necessary, to take screenshots. Again, all the things that I'm talking about in this regard for Crystal and configurations and getting it ready is also still available in the Advanced Reporting Guide, which you can access at any point in time from a support portal. If you've got other questions about information that maybe you missed, I'm also happy to, at the end of this presentation webinar, back up and show you a specific slide if that's what you need. But unfortunately, I cannot provide you the document. All right, so once that DLL file is in the appropriate location, then we're ready to start modifying a few other things on the local workstation so that we can take it further. One of those is we need to extend the environmental variable path in Windows itself. Now, what this basically does is it makes it so that when programs are looking for default information and they're unable to basically find it, it will use this configuration of environmental variable paths to make it more easy to basically resolve where the files are essentially located. So we can do this by basically going into My Computer from the desktop if the icon is available, right-clicking on it, and then going into Property. Once I'm inside of there, I would go to the Advanced page, and there's a section for environmental variables. What we want to basically do is edit it, edit the path for the environmental variables, and at the end of this path, which will be a whole bunch of folder locations, C:\program files, blah, all these applications listed there. I simply go to the end of the path, I can add a semicolon, and then what I want to do is add this information, C:\program files, /interactive intelligence. I want to add that information into the environmental variable path and save it. So I've done my DLL. I've modified my environmental variable path. What's next? Well, then I need to create an ODBC data source, again, for Crystal to make use of. Again, not typically necessary when I'm executing normal historical reports from ICBM because IC is in control of it. But I'm doing this outside of IC. I'm doing it directly from Crystal, so I got to make a connection to the database. So here's sort of an example of what we'd want to do. We want to make an ODBC data source using the appropriate DSN configuration. We point to the name of the data source. We're going to name it description, the server, the SQL or Oracle server where the information is located, and make sure that we have the appropriate credentials in order to access the data stored within that database and within those database tables. Again, this too is covered in the Advanced Reporting Guide. Okay, so now that we've done the necessary things here, we're basically ready to go, but what we want to do is make a mapped drive connecting to where the RPT files are located for the IC server. So why don't I go ahead and show you that here. And what I'm basically going to do is just show you inside of Explorer, Windows Explorer, that I have already made a connection to my dev environment. All right, and what I did is I mapped a drive out here to where all those RPT files are located. This makes it quicker and easier for me to access these RPTs from Crystal. I can just go File, Open, directly to a map drive, and there are all the files that I need. Now you might notice that this path is a little bit lengthy. There's a lot of things going on in here, so I'm going to explain a little bit about it. But basically what I've done is I've connected to the IC server, and I've gotten to the hidden drive where IC is installed. It's $. Now you can still make a mapped, you can make a shared folder if you would like. Share the folder out, and then you could just map to it, and that would be fine as well. Another thing we want to do is make sure that I, as a user, or anyone else, has the appropriate credentials, in our network, so they can access the share, and they could modify or add files to that location. So there might be some security settings that need to be modified as well based on your job responsibility if this is what it takes. So these RPT files that you see at this location, these are the SQL files that I'm looking at. So why don't I go ahead at this point, I'm going to connect to my IC server so that I can show you a little bit about what the breakdown of these different RPT templates is. Now, most of you probably do have SQL, but some of you might have Oracle, so it is important that you understand the difference in where those files are actually located. All right, so I've opened up locally on the IC server, Windows Explorer, and I have the D drive here where IC is installed. If I go inside and I go to i3, IC, there is a server folder. I open it up, and I'm going to find a reports folder as well. Then I see the two folders that I'm looking for, Oracle versus SQL. Each of them had all exactly the same templates, but they're designed appropriately for the database architecture. So Oracle, long list of RPT files, same thing for SQL. So that's what I basically did, is that I just mapped my drive out to the SQL folder, and that's what I'm looking at, SQL on this location, and there are all the RPT files I want. Now, I've basically met all the prerequisites, and I'm essentially ready to go. I can then open up Crystal with my ODBC connection, with the DLL file in place, with my environmental variable path modified, and a drive mapped to the location of the RPT templates. I'm ready to open and potentially modify any of those RPT files that I have. All right, so they mention here on this page a little bit about it too, this idea that each of our reports has an existing RPT file extension. Now, these reporting templates, in case you're unfamiliar, can be used for more than one report. They're not limited on a one-to-one basis. So to illustrate this, let me sort of show you what I mean. I'm going to go back into Interaction Administrator, and there is a file name field within historical reporting. Now, if I extend that, it's going to show me that there's sort of a hidden location, a generic location for where all these RPT files are located that IC is controlling based on whether or not I'm using SQL or Oracle. But when I do look out here, I'm going to see that some of these reports, RPT, line group all trunk busy, is being used more than one time. Okay, so I have different reports displaying different information pulled from the same table based on the same RPT file. So these RPT files can be used over and over again, and there are formulas and fields and things like that that we can basically add into them or modify in Crystal, and that's what I'm getting ready to show you in a second. Looks like I do have some more questions. Let me just take a look out there. And just as a heads up, one of my colleagues is reminding me of the fact, and it's good information, that the other web-based training we have for reporting, that the materials pod inside of that web class basically has all the necessary documents that I've been talking about. The IC reporting guide, the reporting data dictionary, the advanced reporting guide, and some other documents as well. They are still available online at any point in time, and I will show you that a little bit later during the webinar too. All right, so here again, this idea of templates being used for more than one report can be helpful because the RPT file itself has a whole long list of formulas and calculations and all these things that it could display, but based on the report, it either is or is not displaying some of those pieces of information. So let's go ahead now and take a look inside of Crystal. Before we do, just the last heads up, you're going to see this over and over again, that we basically make sure that you understand if you are going to modify a template, and because that template is being used potentially by more than one report, you don't want to modify the base template. Instead, what you should do is make a copy of the template, save it into a work in progress folder, something like that, so that you don't risk overwriting or breaking all of the reports that look at that RPT file. All right, so we're going to open up Crystal, and some of the things that you can do in here are listed. The slides I'll show you briefly, and then we'll just go into Crystal and take a look at a few of these concepts. One of the things that I can do is replace formulas or modify formulas that the report is making use of. If I have two different RPT files open, and again, as long as they're pulling information from the same database table, I can copy formulas from one report and add them into a secondary report. And again, that's really great because we hear all the time about reporting, and gosh, it's great that it shows me all this, but I really wish it showed me this other piece of information that I have to execute a second or even a third report in order to get. So we're going to show you some ways that you can basically deal with that. I can entirely replace fields within my report. I can do essentially what's called report merging by taking formulas and calculations from two different reports, again, pulling from the same table, and add those all into a single report and remove any of the calculations or formulas that maybe I just don't want to see. Another thing is this idea of custom logging columns. So if I am doing handlers to do custom logging of these locations, I can make a formula to basically pull it back as well. Now this sort of window here, Formula Workshop, we're going to open up and I'll show you that in Crystal how that works. All right, and some more about customizing reports. They mentioned some documents here that you might want to take a look at, but they're saying here that we've compiled some ideas about adding, changing, and deleting. And again, I'm just going to open up Crystal because it's always easier for me to do that. Again, they mentioned that this is only possible when they're pulling information from the same database tables. There is a section of the IC reporting guide which is called the Overview of Report Templates and really explains a little bit more about, again, how multiple reports can use the same template and where the information is being pulled from and what you need to know if you're going to modify it. The idea here of changing a formula, again, in Formula Workshop, which I'll show you in a minute, I can come in and take an existing formula, leave it, but then modify what it's actually displaying, and I'll show you that. I can replace fields entirely within the Crystal RPT file. I can rename them. I can remove them. I can relocate them to a different section of the report document as well. One of the really common ones that a lot of people end up wanting to do that's very quick and easy to do is to replace the corporate logo. So we have all the reports with the Interactive Intelligence logo, and maybe you want something that's a little more specific to your organization. All right, Robert has a question I see in the pod here about, can you combine reports into one when pulling from multiple tables? And that is not normally how it works. Again, the idea is that we want to pull information from the same table. Now, however, one of the things that you could do, Robert, in that situation is, with maybe the help of a database administrator or whatever, you could potentially create a view, which is, if you're not as familiar with database stuff, basically I can make a sort of an ad hoc table, and I can pull information from more than one location, two different tables, put them into an ad hoc table called a view that I've created, and then I can make a report to look at that specific view table that I've created and display anything that I want. So there are ways to work around the problem, but by default, when I'm evaluating a formula in a report and I want to copy that formula to a different report, they need to be looking in the same location. Okay, so this idea again about what we were just talking about, copying a formula from one report to the other, I basically can just come into the Formula Workshop, find the formula or equation that I want, highlight it, copy it, and then recreate it or move it over into another report. Merging reports, again, this basically happens when I'm copying a formula from one report to another, and again, only possible when they're looking at the same database tables. We also want to keep in mind that if I am going to merge reports or add or copy formulas to service level types reports, it can be a little more complicated. So service levels, by default, the reports show you up to 6. And if I'm going to break that down or modify, I have to be careful about how the calculations are being done and how the information is being displayed. Also, when you copy formulas to a new report, be sure to check to make sure that all references to any additional formulas or statistics are also properly created in the new or modified report that I'm evaluating. All right, so instead of getting to that last slide, now it's time to go and play a little bit in Crystal. All right, so I have Crystal reports installed on my local workstation, and of course I've met all the necessary prerequisites to make sure that this is going to work correctly. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and just opened up a few of the RPT files just as an example for us to sort of play around with and look at so that we can talk about some of these ideas. So this one that I have in the forefront that we're seeing right now is a user detail RPT file. Now again, if I were to go back into Interaction Administrator and take a look at user detail, this specific report is only being utilized by one report. So the RPT file here, instead of being used by more than one report, it's only being used by one single report. So if I modify this, it's only going to impact this one report, but again, it's always good to do your homework so that you know if I modify this base RPT file, how many reports are going to be impacted by it based upon that. All right, so I've got this one open, and again, one of the things that you could easily do within Crystal is decide that you want to put your company logo here to replace ours. So you can move these things around. You know, I can obviously delete them, and now I can add the exact logo that I want to in that location. And all of the fields that we basically see here, all the things that are being defined can be moved around. They can be relocated. Now, of course, I'm going to want to test it and make sure that it looks aesthetically pleasing, not just has the data that I want to, but is laid out in sort of a logical way that makes sense. And there's all kinds of these either labels or calculations that are being displayed within Crystal, and all of them can be renamed, removed, modified, or whatever. So the database fields are defined here. You can see it is saying I'm looking in the call detail table, and these are the values that I'm able to show you. The little check marks inside Crystal will indicate what's currently being displayed. And this also means that there are other things that are available that maybe haven't been utilized, like DNIS, right? So it would be very easy for me to basically come in and drag one of these specific entries into the report, and just like that, I've modified and added a DNIS value to the specific report. Another one is formulas that are, doing math in the background to display maybe a more complicated value. And again, the green checks indicate what's currently being shown. And if I want to, I could come in and decide to add an additional one, like, let's see here. Looks like I've been playing around in here making all kinds of things. Let's say just for random, I'm going to do minutes and seconds display. Again, I just drag it over and then add it. There's a green check mark indicating that it has been added and is being displayed within that report. Now, that's fine if I want to add just out of the box any existing formulas or any existing fields for that specific table. But what happens when I want to manipulate the calculation, when I maybe want to copy a formula from one report to the other, thereby merging data? How do I go about doing that? Well, what we want to do is open up something called the Formula Workshop. There's a little button here on the toolbar. It's an X+1. That is the button that basically launches the Formula Workshop. There's a menu option for it as well. But when I click on it, it's going to open a new window, a brand new window. And in here, I'm going to see the formula fields. And if I expand it, this shows me all the formulas that are available. There are potentially SQL fields, which we aren't utilizing in a lot of our reports, selection, and formatting as well to make the layout of it more logical. Let's take a look at some of the formulas. So the moment I click on a formula value within the formula fields, it's going to indicate to me the syntax that's being used in order to determine this calculation that we display in the report. So if is null from the call detail table, the account code, then just NA, else, go ahead and show me the account code in that location. So this is sort of literally, if it's blank, say NA, if it's not blank, show me what's there. But I could look at some of these other ones and get a little more information into how it's being displayed, and then again, maybe how I want to modify it. One of the things that you might have noticed, and it's no mistake that I chose the user detail report, is that it contains flexible fields. One flexible field. So there is a value here for flexible column, and it's basically saying, well, there are 4 different things that could potentially be displayed for this flexible column, and then we're going to break down how it's displayed as well. So by default, this report, its 4 flexible fields can show us account code, disposition code, purpose code, and wrap-up code. Now again, if you're thinking outside the box, this may be the moment when you have an aha moment and realize that you could actually modify the default RPT file, the template, to add additional flexible fields as well. And then anyone with access to Interaction Administrator historical reports and knew what they were doing could modify a flexible field and display that different information. Again, it has to come from the same table, but if it's there, we should be able to basically display it. So that's just sort of an idea. You know, I can modify these things. I can change the label if for some reason I don't want it to say account code disposition. I can truncate it, shorten it. I mean, you know, you can do pretty much whatever you want within these. Save the information, and then it will take it into consideration and take that modification, basically. So another thing I could do, aside from something like that, like just changing the syntax or anything, is actually manipulating the formula itself. So if for some reason I wanted to modify a formula, I could come in here and literally manipulate what I'm considering as part of the calculation, and this can be done, again, for any of them. Don't forget the green check mark does tell you what's currently being used, and there are other ones that are not currently being used, but the moment I go back to the main screen and I drag one of these things in, like account code, and now when I go back in a formula workshop, it's going to show you account code has a green check mark, it is being used, and I could modify it. Also, this is a situation where I can copy these formulas and add them into another report, again, as long as they're coming from the same table. All right, so those are really sort of the basics of what you can do with Crystal Reports. This is not intended to really be a Crystal Reports workshop or anything of that nature. We just want to give you an idea of some of the things that can be done and additional to the canned reports. Now, we do have a lot of reporting options, but it can be a little bit overwhelming. Historical reports versus, you know, interaction reporter reports, which are .NET reports, and Report Assistant, which is an ad hoc reporting solution. Our historical reports, again, have always used Crystal, and this is, again, how I can benefit from it, is by modifying any of these existing RPT files, or even going so far as to create my own brand new RPT. So let's take a look now. If I say, okay, I've modified the RPT, I've done what I needed to do, and again, now I want to add it into Interaction Administrator so that other people can run a report utilizing this particular RPT file. And it's kind of like the last time. Instead of copying and pasting, now I could literally come in here and just say new. I give it a name, and I want to choose, again, IC report, even though I created it in Crystal. I give it the display name, a category, and again, I can make up my own category if I want. I'm not very clever, so I pretty much name everything test. And then I browse to wherever that RPT file is located. This is another reason why we want to map the drive. I want to save whatever my newly modified or created RPT file is, point to it from here, and table and parameter things can be defined. I basically indicate the table that I want. I have to choose it from one of the existing data sources, which, by the way, if you're confused about any of these things, this is an excellent time for me to talk about what we talk about in all of our classes and how important it is, this idea of getting help. Now there's a question mark box here, and I could use that to open up the help file, and it will take me exactly to the relevant help topic that details what I need to know for this configuration. Another thing that we talk about is this ability to use F1. It's the same thing, but it's quick and easy. I hit F1, and again, it opens up the help file to exactly that location, and any question I have about what I'm looking at should be answered here. There are even hyperlinks to other help files, so there's just a ton of information. So aside from the documents that I talked about, which I am going to show you how to get to them from a support portal, the help files are an excellent source of information. And that's really what we want to do, is empower you so that you realize that you have control over the system. You can begin to modify things as long as you've done your homework and you know what you're getting into ahead of time. All right, looks like I got another question coming in. Let me take a quick peek at that. Oh, a couple of them. Robert asked a few, can these types of reports be exported to XLS? Absolutely, my friend. And that's done as a result of Crystal. Now, our .NET reports, the Interaction Reporter reports, those reports don't have as many exportable options, but Crystal has a much, much wider array of ways that you can execute and then export the report. So once I've run the report and I have the Crystal report up in front of me, I can export it to a ton of different formats, and XLS is certainly one of those formats. And are these reports, can they be included into something where they're scheduled? Well, basically, to answer your question, we have a separate product, Robert, called Scheduled Reports, and scheduled Reports basically allows you to do exactly what you're saying. So this is sort of a question not included in Robert's question that is sort of inherently implied. And that is, whenever I grant someone access to run a particular report, so let's come up here and pick on Beth Farmer again, right? When I give Beth the ability to run certain reports, she can see these reports, all right? And she can open up ICBM and execute that report. The thing is, there's nothing stopping her from entering any valid parameters into the report when executing it. Meaning, let's say that you and I are supervisors of different work groups. What I want is for you to get a report about your work group and your agents, but what I don't want is for you to take a look at what your colleague, supervisor, or whoever is doing in their work group. Now, unfortunately, if I've given you direct access to the report and you go to choose to run that report in ICBM, there's no way for me to stop you from doing that. Again, I can run the report against any valid data in the database. The only way to modify that so that I get people to see only the information that I want them to see is by using something we have called scheduled reports. Scheduled reports allows you to define the parameters, and then that report is executed however many times a day or once a week that you would like, and then emailed or sent directly to that person. Therefore, they don't have any access to it, they don't have any control, and they see exactly what I want them to see. So Robert, again, to answer your question, yes, you can add any report that you've created and added here in a historical reporting container can be included in the scheduled report solution, and I can email it to any managers, supervisors, or anybody else based on the parameters that I define. So speaking of which, let's take a look at our old friend ICBM. I've opened it up, and if you guys are not as familiar with ICBM, this is normally the application that people are using to get real-time data when monitoring agents, work groups, and the IC system on the whole, and also when executing reports against historical data in the database. So I have the interaction reporter reports that are listed here, and again, these are the .NET reports, and the tab that I've added for historical reports, which are our Crystal reports. So now I have the ability to come in and again run this report, any report that I have access to from here. So let's take a look at a couple. I am going to do user call summary for current user, which is me, basically. I'm not really going to find a lot of data in here. If I do run the report, it's probably going to come back blank. But here's sort of the idea. Let me log in here real quick. Okay, when I go to execute the report, I get this parameter window up, and again, I define the date range, I define the purpose codes, whatever it is I need to define. But again, as Robert was mentioning, I basically report against any valid data or parameters that I specify. There's no way for me to limit. So if you do want to limit people's ability to see data based on information that you define, that's again where something like scheduled reports is really going to come into play. All right, and a couple more questions. I'm going to take a quick peek. Is there a way to do a version control of customized reports in Crystal? I'm assuming yes. I guess that would just require somebody to develop some sort of naming conventions. This is where we normally talk about the idea of like maybe a work in progress folder where you can modify the name of the RPT file to include, V1, V2, whatever, as you're working your way through different versions of the RPT. Any of those RPTs can be added into Interaction Administrator, associated to a report based on the version and something like that. If there is a way to do complete version control within Crystal, I am unaware. Unfortunately, I know the bare minimum when it comes to Crystal. My intention is to show you what's possible, but I don't actually develop custom reports in Crystal myself. So unfortunately, I don't have a super clear-cut answer for that, Sonia. But if that does not answer your question, we can talk about it in a little bit here too. All right, so one of the last things I wanted to show you, again, as we've talked about, is this idea of the sheer amount of information that's out there. How do you wrap your head around it? What can you do? Well, you can get to all the documents that we've been talking about via the support portal. Now, this does require that you have credentials to log into the support portal and access all this information. If for some reason you don't, you can get a hold of your support liaison or partner, and they can help you access this information as well. But basically what I've done is I've logged in to the support portal, and I went to a section called Self-Help. And if you've never been out here before, it's quite impressive. But basically, Self-Help is broken down into different support organizational teams, and there are links in here for me to get information about anything. Look at this right here, scheduled reports. Tells me exactly what I need to know about scheduled reports, how to make use of it, its integration, and so on and so forth. But what I actually did was come in and take a look at data services and reporting. On this page, I have a general information available to me. It describes the subsystems, what their job responsibility is. There are links here for common solutions, triage information if I have problems, and one of the more important things is just documentation. So when I click on documentation, it takes me to this page. I've got 4.0 as well as 3.0 documentation broken down on all sorts of different topics. So things like the reporting guide are here. The advanced reporting guide is here. Reporting data dictionary. All these things are basically very easily accessible from here, even things like attributes. If I'm doing custom logging and pushing information to a call attribute, how do I make use of it? What attributes are available to me? I mean, we've got so much documentation, and we just encourage you to know that you can always go out to the support portal and find this information quickly and readily, and also that the help file is always going to be an excellent source of information as well. Well, my friends, that is mostly what I wanted to talk about during the course of this reporting webinar. I know that some of you have some questions, and we can touch on those while the webinar is coming to completion. But I do want to thank everyone for attending. I put some links up here, and I'm happy to copy them and chat them out to you guys if you're curious about it. But if you went to ININ.com/education, we do have a lot of different pages listed for things like pre-recorded webinars, web-based classes where it would be like this, me and you talking about a subject, and you can register for any of those, and also take a look at what classroom-based opportunities we have as well. If you're curious about things that are going to be included in upcoming service updates, modifications, new features, anything like that, you can find that as well via the support portal, where you can see how service updates are going to impact you, what fixes are included in them, and what new features, and so on. So if you do not have any questions for me based on what we've talked about today, again, I would like to thank you for your time. I will encourage you to come back and see us at any point in time in the future, and we can talk about some more fun things. If you do have questions, just hang out online. I will be available for at least the next half an hour so that we can answer those questions and make sure that whatever concerns you have been addressed. So I want to thank you again for your time, and have an excellent day.